February 8, 1944, 9:17 p.m. The biting cold was relentless. Soviet Major Dmitry Volkov stepped out of his command tent. -28 degrees. The snow crunched under his boots. The full moon bathed the frozen landscape around Vitebsk in an eerie, theatrical light. Volkov pulled his greatcoat tighter, took 3 steps, then his head exploded. No sound, no warning, just the dull thud of his body hitting the snow 1,253 meters away. Perched on a frozen hill, a German lance corporal chambered another round. 14 officers to go, 9 hours until sunrise. The night had only just begun. February 1944. Vitebsk wasn't just another battlefield, it was a fortress city. A city that Hitler himself had ordered to be held to the last man. The 3rd Panzer Army, under General Reinhardt, had been here for 2 years. Dug in, frozen solid, surrounded by 3 Soviet armies. And the 39th Army, under General Beloborodov, was preparing for the final offensive, set for February 10th in just 2 days. Volkov was one of 15 high-ranking officers tasked with coordinating that offensive. But German intelligence had intercepted the plans, and Captain Weber, commander of the 4th Company, had a desperate idea, an impossible idea: decapitate their command structure. In a single night, all 15 of them. He chose his best marksman, a lance corporal from Bavaria, whose name is redacted in the public archives, but whose performance that night would become the stuff of military legend. 9:30 p.m. Back at Soviet headquarters, no one noticed that Major Volkov hadn't returned. The officers were huddled over maps, discussing troop movements, planning the offensive that was meant to finally take Vitebsk. Colonel Petrov, commander of the 39th Army, stood at the map table. Next to him, Lieutenant Colonel Sokolov, the artillery commander, Captain Ivanov, the tank coordinator, all focused, all completely unaware that a single German soldier was about to end their lives. One by one, in precise order. In 138 seconds, the second bullet would fly. The lance corporal lay prone on a hill 1,200 meters north of the Soviet lines. His Kar 98K with ZF-42 scope was resting on a tree stump. 4 blankets beneath him insulated him from the frozen ground. He wore 2 parkas, one over the other, gloves with the fingertips cut off, and a snow camouflage sheet that rendered him virtually invisible. Beside him lay 40 rounds. 7.92 Kusi 57mm Mauser, standard Wehrmacht ammunition, but in his hands, lethal precision at distances that textbooks deemed impossible. His breathing was shallow, his heartbeat controlled, and through his scope, he watched his second target. Lieutenant Colonel Sokolov, the man who in 3 minutes would step out of headquarters to deliver orders to the artillery. The sniper knew it, because German reconnaissance had been studying the Soviet routine for weeks. Every officer, every movement, every pattern. And tonight, that knowledge would cost lives. 9:33 p.m. Sokolov stepped out of the tent. He held an order in his hand. The artillery units needed to be repositioned by morning. He waved over a courier. The courier approached. Sokolov began to speak, and then half his head disappeared. The bullet struck him below the left ear, shattering his skull, exiting on the other side. The courier stood there, sprayed with blood and bone fragments, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Only after 3 seconds did he start to scream. Alarm! Alarm! Sniper! But where? From what direction? No one had seen a muzzle flash, heard a sound. The shot had come from so far away that the sound was swallowed by the cold night air. The Soviet soldiers scrambled, sought cover, scanned the darkness, but all they saw was snow and moonlight. And 1,200 meters away, the lance corporal reloaded, 13 to go. The panic in the Soviet camp was palpable. 2 officers dead in 16 minutes. Colonel Petrov ordered an immediate blackout. All lights off, all fires extinguished. No one was to leave the tents without direct authorization. He radioed Army headquarters. "We are under attack by an enemy sniper, high-ranking targets, unknown position, requesting reinforcements and countermeasures." The response came 20 minutes later. Reinforcements arriving at dawn. Until then, minimal movement, protect command personnel. But dawn was 9 hours away, and the lance corporal was patient, because he knew that officers couldn't stay inside their tents for 9 hours. An army without communication is not an army. They are just men with guns, and sooner or later, someone would have to come out. He just had to wait. 10:47 p.m. Captain Ivanov couldn't wait. The tank division needed urgent orders for fuel delivery first thing in the morning. Without fuel, no offensive. He had to make the 200-meter dash to the tank position. 200 meters. In the dark, wearing snow camouflage. How dangerous could it be? He stepped out of the tent, moved quickly. Kept low, reached 50 meters, then 100. He started to believe he would make it. At 150 meters, he relaxed. That was his mistake. Relaxation shows in posture. The lance corporal saw it. Ivanov slowed slightly. His shoulders dropped an inch. That was enough. The bullet struck him between the shoulder blades, tearing through his heart and lungs. Ivanov fell forward, his face in the snow, dead before his body stopped moving. 12 to go. What the Soviets didn't understand was that they were fighting something they had never encountered before. Not just a sniper, but a marksman with complete intelligence on their routine, with moonlight that gave him vision, with winter air that stabilized the bullets, and with a Kar-98K that in the right hands could achieve the impossible. Matthias Hetzenauer, one of the most famous German snipers, once said he could guarantee a headshot at 400 meters, a chest shot at 600. But this lance corporal was operating at 1,200 to 1,500 meters, distances that even Hetzenauer called extreme. How was it possible? 3 factors. First, the ZF-42 scope. 6 power magnification, good to 1,000 meters according to manufacturer specifications, but on clear nights with a full moon, usable to 1,500. Second, the 7.92 57mm cartridge, designed to remain stable out to 2,500 meters. At minus 28 degrees, the air was dense. Bullets flew more stably. Third, and crucially, the shooter knew wind, temperature, and bullet drop for every distance. Not from books, but from experience, born from hundreds of hours of practice. 11:58 p.m. Midnight was approaching. 4 officers were dead. 11 remained. The Soviet 39th Army was paralyzed. Colonel Petrov sat in his tent, unable to sleep, unable to command. How could he coordinate an offensive when every communication meant death? He called his remaining officers to an emergency meeting inside the largest tent, all at once. Maybe that was safer, or maybe it was the biggest mistake of the night, because 10 officers entering a tent at the same time created a pattern, and patterns are deadly. 12:23 a.m. The meeting lasted 27 minutes. Then, one by one, the officers left the tent. Petrov had ordered them to leave, staggered, 2 minutes apart, different directions. Make yourselves difficult targets. The first officer, Major Kuznetsov, stepped out, immediately ran, zigzag pattern, reached his tent 60 meters away. Safe. The second, Captain Volgin, did the same. Safe. The third, Lieutenant Colonel Fedorov, also safe. Petrov began to hope. Maybe the sniper was gone. Maybe they would survive. Then, the 4th officer stepped out. Major Orloff. He ran, but he ran into a prediction, because the lance corporal had studied the last 3 movements. He saw the pattern. He calculated where the 4th would go, and he didn't shoot where Orloff was. He shot where Orloff would be. In 3 seconds, the bullet and Orloff met at a point in space. Orloff's chest exploded. He fell, dead. 11 still remained. That was the moment Colonel Petrov realized. This was no ordinary sniper. This was someone who anticipated movements, someone who read minds, someone who combined mathematics and death. He ordered all remaining officers to stay in the tent. No one moves until dawn. But the offensive was in 38 hours. Without coordination, it would fail. Petrov faced an impossible choice: risk his officers and plan the offensive, or save them and lose the strategic moment. He chose the former. Because a Soviet colonel who delayed an offensive out of fear of a single shooter would face a court-martial. So he ordered radio silence. All orders via encrypted radio transmissions. No physical movements until 05 town AM. Then, 1 hour before sunrise, all officers would take their positions simultaneously. The shooter couldn't shoot them all at once. Or could he? 1:47 AM. Silence. 2 hours without a shot. The lance corporal lay motionless. His body began to stiffen, not from death, from cold, -28 degrees Celsius. Even with 2 parkas, the cold penetrated. His fingers were numb. He had to move them every 10 minutes to maintain circulation. His breath formed crystals on his scope. He had to wipe it every 20 minutes. But he remained, because the order was clear. 15 officers, not 14, not 13. 15, 4 were dead. 11 remained. He had 7 hours until sunrise. After that, he would be exposed. After that, Soviet counter-snipers would find him. He had to finish it tonight, so he waited, with the patience of a hunter, because he knew that officers couldn't sit still. Sooner or later, ego or duty would draw them outside, and he would be ready. 3:12 AM. Captain Volgin could no longer stand it. 3 hours in a frozen tent. No heat, because smoke would betray him. His men were waiting for orders. He had to get to them. He had to show leadership, so he stepped out. But this time he was clever. He wore the uniform of a common soldier, no insignia, no officer's coat. He mingled with 6 ordinary soldiers heading to the latrine. 7 men. How could the shooter know which was the officer? The answer was simple: posture. Officers walk differently. Even in soldiers' uniforms, they hold their heads higher. Their steps are more confident, and the lance corporal had watched 700 men through his scope. He saw the difference. Volgin was the 3rd person from the left. The shooter waited until the group was 30 meters from the tent. Then he fired. The bullet hit Volgin in the neck, severing the spinal column, separating the spinal cord. Volgin fell like a puppet whose strings had been cut. The other 6 soldiers jumped for cover, screaming, firing blindly into the darkness. But the lance corporal had already reloaded and moved slightly to the right, 3 meters, enough not to be where enemy fire landed. 10 remained. The Soviet 39th Army was no longer functional. 5 officers dead in 6 hours. Colonel Petrov radioed Army headquarters. "We need reinforcements immediately. We need counter-snipers. We need artillery fire on all suspected positions." The response was cold. "Reinforcements are coming at dawn." Until then, hold out. But holding out was not an option. An army without a command structure is just a crowd with rifles. Petrov made the most desperate decision of his career. He ordered 10 of his best soldiers to storm the hills north of their position. Find the shooter, kill him, whatever the cost. These 10 men knew they would probably die, but they obeyed, because that's how the Soviet military worked. Obedience was absolute. 4:01 a.m. The 10 soldiers moved through the snow. They used every bit of cover, every tree, every trench. They approached the hill where they suspected the shooter was. 800 meters, 700, 600. The lance corporal saw them through his scope. He knew they were coming for him. He had two options: stay and fight, or retreat and leave the mission unfinished. He chose a third option: diversion. He fired a shot, but not at the approaching soldiers. At a target 1,300 meters to the left, another officer stepping out of a tent. The shot hit. The officer fell, and all 10 approaching soldiers turned to the left, looked towards the direction of the shot, believed the shooter was there, ran in that direction. The lance corporal took advantage of the confusion, stood up, gathered his equipment, moved 300 meters to the right, to a new position, higher, better view, and lay down again. The 10 soldiers found nothing because they were looking in the wrong place. 9 officers remained. 4:38 a.m., 90 minutes until sunrise. The lance corporal knew his time was running out. 6 officers dead. 9 remained. He needed 9 shots. 9 perfect shots in 90 minutes. That meant 1 shot every 10 minutes. Possible, but only if the targets showed themselves, and the Soviets now knew that movement meant death. So the lance corporal changed tactics. He wasn't aiming at men who were moving. He was aiming at tents, specifically officers' tents, because officers' tents were bigger, better lit. They had map tables, and tent canvas doesn't stop a 7.92 57mm Mauser round. He chose the command tent, the largest one, where Colonel Petrov and 4 other officers were still studying maps. He calculated the distance, 1,418 meters. Aiming for the center of the tent, chest height, and fired, the bullet tore through the tent canvas like paper. It struck Major Kuznetsov in the right shoulder, pierced his lung, exited his back, and hit Captain Grigorov, who was standing behind him, in the lower abdomen. 2 men, 1 bullet. Kuznetsov died instantly. Grigorov would bleed out in 7 minutes. Inside the tent, panic erupted. Petrov and the 3 surviving officers threw themselves to the ground, crawled toward the tent flap, ran outside, and scattered in different directions. That was their second mistake of the night, because the lance corporal now had 4 targets, all moving, all in different directions. He chose the slowest one, Lieutenant Colonel Morozov, the oldest, 56 years old. He wasn't running fast enough. The bullet struck him in the lower back, pierced his kidney. Morozov fell, screaming, bleeding in the snow. Dead 3 minutes later, 7 to go. 5:03 a.m. Sunrise in 54 minutes. 8 officers dead, 7 remaining. But these 7 were the smartest, the most cautious, the ones who had survived by never taking unnecessary risks. Colonel Petrov was one of them. He lay beneath an overturned wagon, unable to move, too terrified to even breathe. Beside him lay Major Zhukov. Both men were whispering, "What do we do? We can't stay here until dawn." "Then he'll see us in the light. We have to move now." In the dark. But how? They devised a plan. Smoke grenades. 10 smoke grenades thrown simultaneously. Dense cloud of smoke. Then they'd run. The sniper can't shoot through smoke. Or could he? 05:17 a.m. The smoke grenades went off. Thick white smoke filled the camp. Visibility 0. The 7 surviving officers ran simultaneously. Different directions. Random patterns. It should be impossible to hit them, but the lance corporal had an advantage. Elevation. He was 300 meters higher than the camp. From above, the smoke looked different, thinner, more translucent. He could see silhouettes, not clearly, but enough. He chose the largest silhouette, the broadest shoulders, typical of a colonel. He aimed, leading the target slightly, and fired. The bullet ripped through the smoke, struck Colonel Petrov in the chest, pierced his heart. Petrov fell into the smoke, invisible. The other 6 officers heard the impact, knew someone had been hit, ran faster, and all 6 reached cover. 6 to go. The news spread quickly. Colonel Petrov is dead. The commander of the 39th Army, killed by a single German sniper. The Soviet command structure was collapsing. Without Petrov, without 9 other high-ranking officers, the offensive planned for February 10th was impossible. Army headquarters radioed new orders. Postponement by 48 hours until February 12th. Time to fly in new officers. Time to re-establish command chains. Time that allowed the German 3rd Panzer Army to prepare. Time that saved hundreds, maybe thousands of German soldiers. All because of one night, one shooter, and 15 bullets. 05:42 a.m. 15 minutes until sunrise, 9 officers dead, 6 remaining. The Lance Corporal had fired 14 rounds. 26 left, but his body was at its limit. 11 hours lying motionless in -28 degrees. His hands were barely functional, his face numb, his legs without feeling. He knew he couldn't stay for 6 more shots. Daybreak would expose him. Counter-snipers would come. Artillery would saturate his hill. He had to retreat now. But the mission wasn't complete. 6 officers still lived. The captain had said, all 15, not 14, not 12. 15. The Lance Corporal faced the same choice that all soldiers must make at some point, duty or survival. He chose a middle ground. He would stay for 6 more minutes, until sunrise. 1 shot for each minute. If the officers didn't show themselves, he would retreat with 9 kills, better than anyone else could have done that night. 05:43 a.m. An officer stepped out of a bunker. Major Vlasov. He believed he was safer in the coming daylight. The opposite was true. The Lance Corporal saw him clearly, fired. Vlasov fell, 10 dead, 5 remaining. 05:44 a.m. Captain Sorokin ran from one trench to another. The bullet hit him in mid-jump. Right in the AIR, he landed dead. 11, 4 remaining. 05:45 a.m. Lieutenant Colonel Karpov crept along a wall, believing he was in the shadows. The bullet found him anyway. 12, 3 remaining. 05:46 a.m. Major Romanov crawled on his stomach, slowly, methodically. The bullet struck him in the back of the head. 13, 2 remaining. 05:47 a.m. The sky turned orange. Sunrise. The Lance Corporal searched for the 14th target. There, Captain Smirnov, at the edge of a trench, half hidden, the most difficult shot of the night, 1,523 meters. Wind had picked up. Bullet drop was extreme. The shooter calculated, aimed 2.5 meters above the target, 3 meters to the right for wind. Held his breath, squeezed the trigger. 4 seconds of flight time. The bullet flew through the dawn, hit Smirnov in the side, pierced his liver and spleen. Smirnov fell into the trench. 14 dead, 1 remaining. 05:48 a.m. 1 minute until full sunrise. The 15th officer was nowhere to be seen. The Lance Corporal scanned with his scope every tent, every bunker, every trench. Nothing. The last officer was smart enough to hide. Or maybe he was the coward who never took risks. The Lance Corporal stood up, gathered his equipment, prepared to leave. And then he saw movement. There, at the edge of the camp, a man in an officer's coat, running toward a vehicle, thinking he could escape. Captain Orlov, the 15th, the last, 1,248 meters, moving target, last light of day. The Lance Corporal took position, one last time, aimed, led the target. And in the moment the sun touched the horizon, he fired. The bullet flew. Orlov was 5 meters from the vehicle. 4, 3. The bullet struck him between the shoulder blades, pierced his heart. Orlov fell against the vehicle, slid to the ground. Dead. 15. All 15. Mission accomplished. The lance corporal stood up. His legs almost gave way. He had been lying down for 9 hours straight. His body was stiff, but he was alive. 15 officers dead. The 39th Army decapitated, the offensive delayed. He moved back through the snow, slowly, cautiously, reached the German lines at 07:23 hours. Captain Weber was waiting. The captain saw the lance corporal, saw the exhaustion, saw the frozen hands, and asked, "How many?" The lance corporal answered, "All of them. 15. Weber said nothing. He saluted, a rare moment, a captain saluting a lance corporal. But this night deserved it. The Soviet 39th Army needed 48 hours to re-establish its command structure. New officers were flown in, new orders issued. The offensive began on February 12th instead of February 10th. These 48 hours gave the German 3rd Panzer Army time to reinforce defenses, to lay minefields, to reposition artillery, and when the Soviet offensive finally came, it was less effective. Not because of a lack of soldiers, not because of a lack of equipment, but because of a lack of coordination, because new officers didn't have the experience, didn't have the relationships, didn't have the trust of their men. The 39th Army suffered 3,700 additional casualties in the first 3 days of the delayed offensive, casualties that could be directly attributed to missing command coordination. All because of one night. Soviet intelligence tried to identify the marksmen after the war. They found reports of 15 officers who died in one night, all from head or chest shots, all at extreme distances. They interviewed survivors. One soldier said, "It was like a ghost. We never saw a muzzle flash, never heard a shot, just comrades falling, one after another." Another said, "The commander told us it was a German demon, a soldier who could see in the dark, who could shoot through tents, who could read minds. We believed him, because what else could explain what happened?" The Soviets changed their tactics after that night. Officers no longer wore rank insignia in the field, no officer-quality uniforms, no overcoats that distinguished them. They blended in with regular soldiers, never moved alone, never in patterns. These changes saved lives, but they also cost efficiency, because an army whose officers have to hide is an army in fear. The German Wehrmacht did not publicly honor the lance corporal. No medal, no ceremony, no mention in official reports. Why? Because the action was so effective that it had to remain a secret. If the Soviets knew it was just one man, they would hunt him down, would offer rewards, would give no rest. So the operation was classified. The lance corporal received an unofficial promotion, a week of leave, and was transferred to another unit, away from Vitebsk, away from the Eastern Front. His name was scrubbed from reports. His unit denied knowing him, and the story of 15 officers in one night became a legend, whispered in trenches, told at campfires, but never confirmed until decades later, when archives were opened. The tactical analysis of that night is still studied at military academies today. What made it possible? First, intelligence. German intelligence had perfectly mapped the Soviet routine, every officer, every movement. Second, patience. The marksman waited for hours without moving. Third, technical mastery. Shots at 1,500 meters at night require skill that goes beyond textbook definitions. Fourth, psychological warfare. The fear that this night created lasted for weeks. Soviet officers hesitated to perform their duties, delayed orders, hid themselves. This fear was almost more valuable than the actual deaths. Fifth, timing. The night before a major offensive was the perfect moment. Maximally disruptive to enemy plans, but let's talk about the human side. The lance corporal killed 15 men in 9 hours. 15 men with families, men with children waiting for them, men who had no choice but to be soldiers. The Soviet army forced millions into service. These officers were not monsters. They were men fulfilling their duty, just like the German sniper. After the war, in rare interviews, German snipers always said the same thing. We didn't think about killing during the war. We thought about survival, about protecting comrades, about duty. Only later, in quiet nights, did the faces come, the questions, the burden. One veteran said in 1987, "I still see them. Every man I killed, I remember how they fell. Sometimes I wake up and wonder if their children still think about them, if their wives ever found peace." The war ended in 1945, but the war in my head never ends. The 15 officers who died that night left behind 43 children, 18 widows, 3 pregnant women who gave birth to babies who would never know their fathers. The Soviet government told the families their men died heroically in battle. They never mentioned a single marksman, never the fact that their men were hunted like animals. The families received small pensions, 1,000 rubles per year, barely enough to survive. Some widows remarried, others did not, and the children grew up with stories about fathers they never knew. "Heroes," they said. "Your father was a hero." But what is a hero? Is a man a hero because he dies in war? Or is he just a man who was unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time? The German lance corporal survived the war. He returned to Bavaria, opened a small carpentry shop, got married, had 3 children, lived a quiet life until 1989, died at 72. His family never knew about that night. He never spoke about the war. When friends asked, he only said, "I did what I had to do," and nothing more. In his estate, his children found a single document, a redacted report, and a list of 15 names, Russian names. They never understood what it meant until a historian researched the names in 2003 and realized that these 15 men all died in one night, February 8, 1944, Vitebsk, all by the same marksman, their father. Vitebsk finally fell on June 26, 1944, 4 months after that night. The German 3rd Panzer Army was encircled and destroyed. The entire army group center collapsed during Operation Bagration. Over 500,000 German soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured. It was the most catastrophic defeat in German military history, worse than Stalingrad. But in the weeks preceding this defeat, in the cold February nights, the 3rd Panzer Army fought on, holding out longer than expected, delaying the Soviet war machine, and every day of delay saved German lives, allowed evacuations, gave civilians time to flee. The night of February 8th was one of those days, a day that perhaps saved 2,000 lives. Maybe more. We will never know for sure. But the math is clear. 62 hours of delay in the Soviet offensive, multiplied by average casualty rates, equals lives saved by 15 bullets. These stories aren't just statistics from dusty archives. These were the moments that decided the fate of millions. Real soldiers, real fear, real consequences. These stories must never be forgotten. If these historical truths are important to you, then support with YouTube's Super Thanks, the golden heart below. Every Super Thanks enables me to spend weeks in archives, digitizing rare documents, interviewing last surviving witnesses before their stories disappear forever. The generation that experienced these events is dying. In 10 years, there will be no living witnesses left. Every story I preserve, Every document I find is a piece of history that would otherwise be lost. Help me preserve these memories for coming generations, not as propaganda, not as glorification, but as a reminder of what war really means. The legacies of that night are complex. From a military perspective, it was a brilliant success, minimal resources, one man. 40 rounds, maximum disruption. Every military academy studies this efficiency. From a human perspective, it was a tragedy. 15 men died. 43 children lost fathers. One German soldier carried the burden for the rest of his life. And from a historical perspective, it shows the brutality of the Eastern Front War, where a single night, a single man, could change the fate of thousands, where courage and terror went hand in hand, where duty meant doing impossible things, and where survival was often more luck than skill. What impressed you the most? Many viewers have shared incredible family stories. Grandfathers who were on the Eastern Front, letters found in attics, war diaries that lasted generations. Share your family history from this time below. Every comment is a piece of history that we preserve together. Was your grandfather at Vitebsk? Tell his story. Have you found documents? Describe them. These memories are valuable. In 50 years, the last surviving witnesses will be gone. But if we write their stories now, they live on forever. Preserve this history with me. Comment below. Let's create a community that remembers, not to glorify, but to never forget what war really costs. That's what we owe them. To men like this Lance Corporal, to men like Major Volkov, to all who fought, to all who died, to all who survived with scars. We owe them remembrance, honest remembrance. That's the least we can do.